Anime isn't just entertainment, it's therapy disguised as storytelling. Every frame, every silence, every scar hides a truth about who we are. And here on Rehab Otaku, we don't just watch anime, we unravel it. Like Super Eye Patch Wolf, we search for the meaning buried beneath emotion. Like Mother's Basement, we dissect how craft shapes feeling. And like the Kanapar effect, we trace the heartbeat of the art itself. But this isn't their story, it's ours. Here, every analysis is a mirror, reflecting the loneliness, brilliance, and quiet madness that make anime human. Welcome to Rehab Otaku, where we don't escape reality through anime. The world of magic is loud. Explosions of color, symphonies of incantations, the clash of wills echoing through stone halls built to amplify human genius. Every spell, a declaration of self. Every word, an attempt to master chaos. But then, there is her, a girl whose greatest spell is silence. Monica Everett, the youngest saint in the kingdom's history. A prodigy so powerful she could burn through the sky and yet trembles before the sound of her own voice. In a world where power is spoken, she whispers. And somehow, that whisper shakes the world. Her silence unsettles people because it feels like a mirror. It forces us to question what we hide behind our words. Monica's story begins not with a battle, but with avoidance. Behind curtains during lectures, behind her own heartbeat when asked to speak, she hides not because she lacks courage but because she understands too well what words can do. In this world, magic is not just a tool, it's identity. To speak is to exist, to falter is to fade. A society that worships articulation punishes hesitation, and Monica's stutter marks her as fragile. But fragility, as Nietzsche once said, is where the cracks of transcendence begin to show. When she is chosen to protect the second prince under a false name, her silence becomes her disguise, her weapon, her cage. It is in pretending to be powerless that she rediscovers power, because silence, though invisible, reshapes the air around it. It invites meaning to bloom in the absence of noise. Every episode of her story unfolds like a quiet storm. She enters a world of chatter and ceremony, of gossip and politics. Every conversation feels like walking barefoot across glass. And yet, when danger arrives, she becomes something divine. The girl who can barely say her own name turns her fear into focus. In those moments, silence is not weakness, it is clarity. Without words to cloud intention, she moves like still water, each motion deliberate, pure. But the revelation runs deeper. Her silence was never mere shyness. It was born from pain. Once, her words caused harm, unintentionally, uncontrollably. The laughter, the ridicule, the pressure of perfection crushed her voice until she could no longer tell where fear ended and she began. So she created a refuge, the void. To the world, she became the silent witch. To herself, she became a ghost. In psychological terms, Monica's silence is both symptom and shield. It is the body's natural response to overload, the nervous system retreating inward to survive. The mind, when bruised by judgment, rewires itself toward invisibility. But the tragedy of trauma is that what once protected us eventually imprisons us. Her silence becomes self-erasure, a refusal not only to speak, but to be seen. And yet, the universe has a strange way of confronting what we fear most. The prince she's assigned to guard is everything she isn't: confident, curious, socially fluent. His light presses against her shadow. Jung might say he is her animus, the counterpart that forces her psyche into balance. Every interaction with him draws her closer to the edge of exposure. Every word she stumbles through becomes an act of rebel lion against her own defenses. Slowly, imperceptibly, she begins to rediscover that vulnerability is not failure, it's connection. Because no one can remain a ghost forever. Her silence, once sacred, starts to crack. And in those fractures, something luminous seeps through: humanity. There's a strange beauty in how the show refuses to dramatize her anxiety. It's not spectacle, it's realism. You can feel it in the way she averts her gaze, in how the sound design amplifies her breath instead of her voice. The anime doesn't tell us she's scared, it makes us feel the paralysis. Camus wrote that the only real philosophical question is whether to live or to die. For Monica, every word is a small resurrection, a choice to rejoin the living world. She lives between two existential poles, the need to connect and the fear of consequence. And that's the essence of absurdism, the awareness that life has no guaranteed meaning, and yet we must speak, act, and love anyway. Through silence, Monica embodies the quiet defiance of existence itself. The irony is that her greatest power emerges from the very thing she's ashamed of. By refusing to cast spells aloud, she creates an entirely new form of magic: silent incantation, intent without sound. It's as if she rewrites the metaphysics of her own world, that words are not the source of power, but its limitation. In that way, Monica echoes the myth of the demiurge, the craftsman who shapes reality through will alone. She transcends language. She proves that magic was never in the sound of words, but in the consciousness behind them. Nietzsche might call this her will to power, the transformation of weakness into strength, of repression into mastery. Silence becomes not absence, but the most refined expression of will. And yet, every act of mastery carries a shadow, because the more she controls her world, the less she feels part of it. Her silence, once empowering, grows heavy again. She can't laugh freely. She can't cry aloud. Control becomes another kind of prison, this time gilded, not iron. That's where the story becomes deeply human. We've all known what it's like to control ourselves too tightly, to curate our emotions, to avoid being too much, to speak less because we've learned the world punishes honesty. Monica becomes a mirror for the modern soul. We, too, live in a world that rewards noise and punishes hesitation. The digital age prizes performance over sincerity. The louder you are, the more real you seem. But in that volume, truth gets lost. Monica's silence becomes rebel lion against that culture. Her restraint feels radical in a time where self-expression has become commodified. She refuses to participate in the endless noise. And in that refusal, she becomes a philosopher of quiet. There's an echo here of Simone Weil's writings on attention, the idea that the purest form of love is listening. Monica's silence is not withdrawal, it's presence without interference. It's choosing to observe reality without dominating it. When others cast spells to control the world, she listens to its pulse. She doesn't seek to own truth. She simply bears witness. This is where her character transcends the typical hero's journey. She doesn't grow louder. She grows deeper. And when the people around her begin to see that depth, something profound happens. They adapt to her rhythm. Her silence changes them. It forces others to slow down, to communicate with empathy, to attune themselves to subtler frequencies of meaning. That is Monica's real magic. She reteaches the world how to listen. But what if silence itself was never a symptom? What if it was design? Imagine a universe where Monica's power didn't come from trauma, but from knowledge. What if her voice carried the resonance of the word of creation, the sound that birthed the cosmos? To speak would be to unmake the world. Then silence becomes sacred duty, not fear. A divine vow to protect existence from her own voice. She would not be a girl afraid of sound, but a god bound by compassion. The mute creator, echoing the ancient myth where the universe begins not with a bang, but with a breath held in mercy. This what if turns her character from victim to guardian. It transforms her silence from fragility to transcendence. And it mirrors something deeply spiritual found in both Eastern and Western philosophy. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the sage who acts without speaking. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment begins in stillness. Even in Christianity, God's greatest revelations come not through thunder, but through whispers in the desert. Maybe Monica Everett is that bridge, the embodiment of the idea that divine power and human tenderness meet in quiet. Stillness becomes her temple, restraint, her prayer. And when she finally chooses to speak again, it's not a triumph of sound, it's a moment of grace. Because the goal was never to destroy her silence, it was to understand it. By the end of her journey, she hasn't transformed into a different person. She has simply remembered that silence and voice were never enemies, they were two halves of the same self. In psychological terms, that's integration, the reconciliation of the shadow with the conscious mind. Jung would say she has made peace with her inner opposites. Her silence becomes expression. Her fear becomes awareness. Her solitude becomes empathy. This quiet transformation is what separates the silent witch from other fantasy narratives. It's not about conquering dragons or empires, it's about conquering noise. It's about realizing that healing isn't loud. In an age where everyone is trying to be seen, Monica teaches the beauty of being still. Her silence isn't emptiness, it's space. The kind of space where truth has time to settle. In that sense, Monica Everett stands beside the great introspective archetypes of modern storytelling. She shares lineage with Motoko Kusanagi from Ghost in the Shell, who questions her own humanity in the silence between circuits. She echoes John the Savage from Brave New World, whose rebel lion lies in refusing to conform to the numbing comfort of noise. All of them wrestle with the same question: what remains of us when we stop performing? And the answer, Monica shows us, is frighteningly simple. What remains is what was always real. Silence becomes the test of authenticity, because only in stillness can we tell which voices are ours, and which were planted by the world. Perhaps that's why her story lingers long after the credits. It's not about magic at all. It's about the courage to hear yourself. We live in an age of endless speaking. Every thought is broadcast, every moment captioned, every silence filled. But meaning, like oxygen, only exists in space. Without pause, there is no melody, only noise. Monica's silence reminds us that restraint is not repression, it's composition, the deliberate choice to let absence reveal essence. Her arc feels almost musical, a crescendo towards stillness. Each episode less about power and more about presence. Each moment a meditation on how to live without drowning in the sound of our own self-expression. By the time the season ends, Monica hasn't shattered her silence. She's simply learned to rest within it. And that, perhaps, is the greatest spell of all. Because true mastery isn't the ability to speak, it's the ability to know when not to. Her story invites us to consider what would happen if we too stopped explaining ourselves for a while, if we let our silence speak instead. Camus said, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." Monica's silence is that winter, cold, isolating, yet necessary, because only through it does she discover the warmth that was always inside. Her stillness is rebel lion against despair. When she closes her mouth, she opens her soul. And in that closing moment, the one where she finally whispers again, it isn't power returning. It's trust. Trust in herself, in her world, in the fragile strength that exists between fear and love. The beauty of the silent witch is that it doesn't treat silence as the end of communication, but as its beginning. It shows that real dialogue starts not when we speak, but when we learn to listen to others, to the world, to the quiet truth beneath our own noise. And maybe that's why Monica Everett feels so alive as a character. Because she's not fantasy, she's reflection. She's what happens when pain and genius coexist long enough to understand each other. She teaches us that the truest form of magic isn't what you can summon from the world, but what you can summon from within yourself. Her silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the sound of a soul learning to breathe again. So when you find yourself unable to speak, when the world feels too loud, too expectant, too cruel, remember her. Remember that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting for you to stop running long enough to feel it. Monica Everett didn't conquer her fear, she learned to live beside it. And that is what makes her extraordinary, because silence, in the end, is not the absence of power. It is the proof that you no longer need to prove it.